Okay, it is 1 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and get started so our presenters have all the time allotted to them. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. This is called Speaking from Experience, Librarians Authoring OERs, presented by Cindy Gruel and Robin Ewing. I was going to butcher that, I knew it. My name is Stephanie. I am the moderator today, and I'm joined by Jennifer Pate, who is my co-moderator, and we will both be monitoring the chat for any questions and technical issues. We ask that everyone in this session adhere to the OESS Code of Conduct. I'm going to be placing a link to this code in the chat, but we want to emphasize a few things before we begin. The Open Education Southern Symposium, OESS, strives to offer an open and inclusive and friendly environment for all participants. All attendees are expected to help maintain a professional and welcoming environment free of any type of harassment. Together, we can create a space where individuals feel free to express themselves, work together, and come up with solutions to today's unique challenges. The organizers of OESS appreciate your help in making this symposium a friendly and welcoming virtual experience. Please note that all sessions are being recorded. And with that, I am turning it over to our speaker.
We good to go?
We're good to go.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm Robin Ewing, and I'm a librarian at St. Cloud State University. It's just in St. Cloud, Minnesota.
And I'm Cindy Gruel, University of Florida in Pensacola, Florida. Whoops.
You're driving this bus. So today we're going to talk to you about the work that we did to create an open textbook, which is called Critical Thinking in Academic Research. And that was you're too fast.
I'm sorry.
That was the image of it. And Cindy has dropped the link to it in the chat, and we'll drop it again later on too. Okay. All right, so this is kind of like the roadmap for what we're going to talk about today. So we'll give you some idea of like why we even did this adventure. We'll talk about how we went about creating the textbook. So what we did to create this textbook, it's an adapted textbook. And then we'll give you a special preview, a special focus on time management and how that helped us, or not helped us, get our work done. And then we'll finish up with giving you some tips that we have learned over time, and we're hoping to share. We want to share with other people to help you kind of avoid the roadblocks that maybe that we had stumbled into, and then a glimpse of what we're going to do going forward. So we started this work in the fall of 2019. So I have it down here as in the beginning, there was a grant. So at the time, Cindy worked with me at St. Cloud State University, and St. Cloud State University is part of the Minnesota colleges and university system. So the system was offering OER Collaboration Grants, and they were a way to encourage faculty and other people in the system to create OERs. And Cindy was like, I'm gonna apply for one. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll help. So that's how we got started. So our impetus for doing this and why we thought it was a good idea was that we were teaching a class called Critical Thinking in Academic Research. It's a 3-credit course that blends information literacy with critical thinking concepts. And we were using a textbook, Brown and Keeley's Asking the Right Questions. That was okay, right? I mean, it was fine, and students seemed to be okay with this textbook, and it was reasonably priced. But reasonably priced isn't the same as zero. And so we thought, there's been a push within the system to kind of have some Z degree options. So options where students can complete, like, say, general education requirements without having to purchase a textbook. So we wanted to contribute to that work. And one of the other things we thought about is, well, first of all, the Brown and Keeley textbook, the different format options had gotten kind of, felt like they were really pushing to get people to buy the ebook option and not having a print option anymore. And students seemed to like the print option okay. So we were kind of like, maybe it's time to move away from that textbook. And we thought that an open textbook, you know, it can be really stressful for students at the beginning of the semester, especially when they're changing. Am I frozen?
No.
Oh, suddenly you look very still, Cindy.
No.
It can be stressful at the beginning of the semester trying to like gather the materials, right? Getting the textbooks, and with an open textbook like this, there's no stress for the students, right? We're just going to give them the links to the chapters they need to read. They don't need to find anything. We're going to make it easier for them. And we thought that OERs, like both of us had taken the Creative Commons Librarian certificate. Cindy's laughing because it was sometimes not. That we'd taken that course and we were like, okay, so we can adapt. We don't have to like create something from scratch, which just seems so scary because we had briefly talked about that in the past. And so we were like, okay, we have the option to adapt. And really, along with that option to adapt and just how easy Pressbooks is, we thought, man, we can have a really short timeline and we can get it done quickly.
And then reality strikes. And as we started our journey in 2020, we had that spark of an idea in our very early planning stages. And then whammo, the pandemic struck. And then during that time, also life events happened. And I ended up leaving St. Cloud State University and making a 1,000-mile trek down here to Florida. So obviously that definitely was a pretty big interruption. But in 2021, early 2021, we really got into our planning and our core work for the text. And then moving along, we added additional content and fixes in 2022, and we published in May 15th. So the sources that we decided to use is Choosing and Using Resources, a guide to academic research. And many of you may be familiar with this book. We decided to use that as our core and then build in the critical thinking components. And we ended up selecting 2 that we drew from. These were all Creative Commons CC BYs, which made it easy to adapt and mesh them together. But we selected critical thinking and analysis and evaluation of argument, and then from a course by 130 critical thinking course. So the work, of course, really focused on adapting and modifying these resources into one text. So our process began by exploring resources, and I'm sure I drove Robin crazy because I come up with a different critical thinking resource just about every other month. But we moved from exploring those resources to developing our initial framework, which was pretty early on of what we wanted to do. We cloned the core text, which made our lives much easier because we didn't have to cut and paste and do all that work. We were able to take that text and manipulate it and get it into a framework that really worked for us, and then spend our time editing and revising. Of course, in the midst of this, as I mentioned, we had the pandemic stall. And then we also changed Pressbooks location from one location with Minnesota State to another, which was really nice because it, but along with that change, we were going to be able to use H5P for interactivity. We did a refresh and focused on our learning outcomes, which Robin will talk more about. And then we added our critical thinking content. All the way at the end of this process, we inserted interactive H5P activities. Robin.
So, you know, time management. It was somewhat of a nemesis, I would say. And, obviously some of it was out of our control. Cindy, we needed to move, and the pandemic happened, and I also had a kind of a major reading project, sort of a surprise major reading project. And so it was kind of like we did have a little bit of a stall there, but you can go ahead and move to the next one. So we do have some challenges that we want to talk about, because we did plan. Obviously you should plan your time, you should plan your project, right? And as I mentioned earlier, we started in the fall of 2019, and our initial plan was to finish by the end of the spring 2020 semester. And I laugh because even without a pandemic, this was sort of like an ambitious plan. And part of it was driven by the grant, because they wanted us to do a presentation. There was going to be like a symposium. I can't remember what they called it, a symposium or some sort of conference, where the people that had gotten grants would come together and share their work. So that was sort of a deadline that was hanging out there for us. And in initial planning, we were like, we were planned out how to adapt the choosing and using sources that Cindy talked about. And I felt like in that fall, we were on our way to finding a source for the critical thinking aspect. So I think we thought we were confident. We were confident that our timeline was going to be okay. And then, like I said, we hit the pandemic, and Cindy changed positions, and we kept plugging away, but it was sort of unstructured, right? Like we didn't ever stop working on it, but it was kind of slowed down. And, we kept meeting, but it was, meandering around, and we got the choosing and using finished. But we really stalled out, as Cindy described it, on our critical thinking aspects, because we hadn't quite found the source, which was why Cindy kept emailing them to me, because we kept looking for more. She'd be like, how about this? And I'm like, I haven't looked at the last one you sent me. I'd have to type these emails out to us. And so then earlier this year, and I don't know what prompted this, we just had this epiphany. We were like, you know what, we're going to go back to basics. The sort of like, we created a spreadsheet of our learning outcomes and where the content could come from. And we'll show you that in a minute. Yeah, here we go. So, and then, it's sort of it's the backwards design stuff, right? We just went back to basics. It's the stuff we know about, that you should start with what we want the students to be able to do, and then work from there. And that's not to say we hadn't taken in the course outcomes when we were creating this. And I think, ironically enough, in a course that we teach about assumptions, Cindy and I had both made the assumption that we had so internalized the course outcomes that of course we were going to account for them as we went through this work. And in fact, not that we were far off, but we didn't quite intentionally account for them. And that's what this spreadsheet helped us do. So on the left, we have the outcomes that we needed to, the course outcomes. And these are taken from our liberal education program at St. Cloud State. So this course actually satisfies the critical thinking requirement for students. And then we kind of tried to parse them out, like what students actually needed to learn to achieve those outcomes. Because I don't know about your institutions, but certainly some of our course outcomes have like 37 concepts in them, right? And so we were like, okay, let's pull them all out. I'll skip over the notes decision column, but then the next, our textbook, the critical thinking, which was one of the critical thinking texts that Cindy had found. The author's name is Brian Kim. And then the Bailey one, and then the critical reasoning. We were just like, okay, where are we going to get this? So for example, an introduction to critical thinking, or sort of a definition of critical thinking, where all can we find that? And so we said, well, that's like in 3 different places. So which one do we want to use? And that's where we put the notes and decisions, because we were like, okay, let's look at them and see which one makes the most sense for us. And so we just went through all the outcomes that way. And I don't know how to tell you this, but just kind of just really energized us. And then we were like, bam, done. It was so funny how quickly we got things done after this point. Yeah. I don't know what's next, Cindy. I can't remember. Oh, it's me. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a little delay. So.
Oh, okay. So we do want to share some tips with you if you are considering creating a document where you're going to, especially one that's a larger document, obviously you can, not all like, textbooks for a course, but if you are considering something like that or working with faculty on your campus to do something like that, we do have a few tips for you. Okay. So, obviously we planned ahead and we urge you to plan ahead. And as I wrote in my notes, listen, we thought we had a plan, but we didn't build in things into the plan like time to review and revise. Like we were like, okay, we're going to have these 3 chapters done by, in the next 2 months, but we didn't build in the time to review the work that we had done and get them revised again. And so that was something that I think kind of frustrated a little bit, because we felt like we were losing progress, but we really weren't. You just have to build in, you have to be intentional about saying, well, we're going to spend, the next 2 weeks reviewing and revising, especially when you're working with another person, right? You are looking, okay, you're kind of checking each other's work because you want to make sure you're like, oh, if you said X in chapter 3, that I better confirm it in the next chapter or something like that. And, obviously consider backward design. As I mentioned earlier, we were like, oh, we know those course learning outcomes, and we do obviously know the course learning outcomes, but we weren't intentional in spelling out what all needed to come, what we needed to use to get those course outcomes, make sure the students encountered the content for the course outcomes. And I would say also, this is a little bit because we had been using that textbook for several semesters, and I think we had kind of just fallen into the trap of the textbook, right? Of having the course and the textbook the same, and they're not. And so stepping out and looking at the course learning outcomes and letting go of the textbook we had been using really helped us kind of get the job done in the end. And we mentioned, being intentional about meeting and allotting some work to plan on a regular basis. And we were inconsistent about that for a while. I mean, there are reasons why, right? That, but really kind of commit. This is a work that you're going to do. You have to commit to it. You have to find the time for it and really commit to it. So I do advise you to do that. And obviously you don't want to start a major project without a plan to get the work done or ignore your schedule. And I think it's in your best interest in the beginning as you're planning to start thinking about like, what kind of frustrations could come up for us and how are we going to handle them? And we did get a little frustrated, not frustrated with each other, but we got frustrated at the work that we were like, why are we I feel like we're circling, we're just in the same area. We need some wind in our sails, right? Like we're just like circling the same area. And that was kind of frustrating for us, but then we did figure our way out of it. And so I think one way for us, that one piece of advice we would offer you to do that is to think of another way to look at your work. And that's what helped us, is to come at it from another angle. It could be something simple like, you know what, let's start at the end of the book and come up, or let's start in the middle, or let's do some other, just something different, just kind of make your brain think a little differently about it. And I did say we would give a little glimpse of our future plans. And the main ones that I would say that we have is to improve our H5 activities. So I think Cindy's going to tell you some more about all that work.
So in the future, well, the future is now. I think someone else coined that phrase. We're both going to use this in the classroom. Robin is using it in the course that we intended it for, critical thinking and academic research. And then I'm going to be using parts of it in a capstone course for general education studies. We want to ideally create ancillary materials that can be used with it, because we do a lot of searching ourselves for things that exist. So it would be nice to develop something that is a companion to the actual book. And then we want to revive the H5P activities we like them, but we feel they could definitely be improved. That was probably the only thing where I could say we might have rushed to get those done. And then the next edition, we would really like to base on feedback from our students about the ease of use, hopefully, and the readability and interactivity with their coursework. Finally, we celebrate that it's done. And as of this morning, well, I have 6/23, that date didn't get changed, but as of this morning, we've had 761 visitors with 3,178 views. And it's really nice to see parts of the book being used quite extensively. So thank you, and we would now like questions.
Thank you, Cindy and Robin. And that's fantastic about your use numbers. Please go ahead and place all your questions in chat and I will read them. But thank you both again. It was fantastic. And I totally understand about things coming up and during plans awry for sure. Marty Miller says, excellent planning tips. Cindy knew all the places to share the book once we finished. So have a marketing genius on your group.
Well, she does that work now at her new place. So she knew like, well, I'm going to put it on, well, the open textbook place at the U of M, the University of Minnesota, and then all the other ones. And I was like, okay.
Which is, I have to say, awesome, because I can tell where the people, their entry points to the book, and the U of M site is hot. So if you have books that you're working on or working with, definitely somewhere you want to get that book listed.
Absolutely.
I see we have some slides go, people.
Oh yeah.
It has transformed my presentations.
Any other comments or questions for Cindy and Robin? Well, not seeing any come in, but Cindy and Robin's contact information is on the slide. I'm sure they'll be happy to share it with you also in chat if you'd like.